Chapter 4. The Slave Trade. 300 years ago, no Negroes were to be found in this Western Hemisphere. We were to be found exclusively in Africa. Just about that time, a large number of white people settled in America. They desired laborers to help them in the country's development. They turned to Asia and were unable to use the yellow man. At that time, a man named John Hawkins asked permission of Queen Elizabeth of England to take the blacks from Africa into her colonies of America and the West Indies and use them in their development. The Queen asked, "What consideration will you give them?" Hawkins said they will be civilized and Christianized in the colonies, for in their own country they are savages and barbarians. Under these pretenses, the British Queen signed a charter empowering John Hawkins and others to remove from Africa millions of our foreparents, men, women and children who were sold in the slave markets of the southern states of America and the West Indies. Parents were separated from children, husbands from wives, all scattered in this Western Hemisphere to work in the cotton fields of the southern states of America and the sugar plantations of the West Indies. The Negroes who were sold in the West Indies remained as slaves for 230 years, and those sold in America for 250 years. The West Indian Negroes were emancipated 85 years ago by Queen Victoria of England, and the American Negroes 58 years ago by Abraham Lincoln. We, the Negroes in this Western Hemisphere, are descendants of those Africans who were enslaved and transported to these shores, where they suffered, bled and died to make us what we are today, civilized Christian free men. Should we not, therefore, turn our eyes towards Africa, our ancestral home, and free it from the thraldom of alien oppression and exploitation? Negro status under alien governments. Within modern times, the Negro race has not had any real statesman, and the masses of our people have always accepted the intentions and actions of the statesmen and leaders of other races as being directed in our interest as a group in conjunction with the interests of others. Such a feeling on our part caused us to believe that the Constitution of the United States was written for Negroes as well as the constitutions of England, France, Italy, Germany, and other countries where Negroes happen to have their present domicile, either as citizens or as subjects. That we suffer so much today under whatsoever flag we live is proof positive that constitutions and laws, when framed by the early advocates of human liberty, never included and were never intended for us as a people. It is only a question of sheer accident that we happen to be fellow citizens today with the descendants of those who, through their advocacy, descendants laid the foundation for human rights. So this brings us to the point where, as a people, we can expect very little from the efforts of present-day statesmen of other races, in that their plans are laid only in the interests of their own people, and not in the interest of Negroes. Hence it is imperative that Negroes as a people evolve just at this time a statesmanship sufficiently able to cope with the designs and movements that are being made that will ultimately mean our doom and destruction. The Negro as an industrial makeshift. The Negro's prosperity today, limited as it is based upon the foundation laid by an alien race that is not disposed to go out of its way to prepare for the economic existence of anyone else but itself. Therefore, our present prosperity, as far as employment goes, is purely accidental. It is as accidental today as it was during the War of 1914-18, when colored men were employed in different occupations. Not because they were wanted, but because they were filling the places of men of other races who were not available at that time. Negroes are still filling places, and as time goes on and the age grows older, our occupations will be gone from us, because those for whom we filled the places will soon appear, and as they do, we shall gradually find our places among the millions of permanent unemployed. The thing for the Negro to do, therefore, is to adjust his own economic present, in readiness for the future. A race that is solely dependent upon another for its economic existence sooner or later dies. As we have in the past been living upon the mercies shown us by others, and by the chances obtainable, and have suffered therefrom, so will we in the future suffer if an effort is not made now to adjust our own affairs. Lack of cooperation in the Negro race. It is so hard, so difficult to find men who will stick to a purpose, who will maintain a principle for the worth of that principle, for the good of that purpose, and if there is a race that needs such men in the world today, God Almighty knows it is the race of which I am a member. The race needs men of vision and ability, men of character, and above all men of honesty, and that is so hard to find. The greatest stumbling block in the way of progress in the race has invariably come from within the race itself. The monkey wrench of destruction, as thrown into the cog of Negro progress, is not thrown so much by the outsider as by the very fellow who is in our fold, and who should be the first to grease the wheel of progress rather than seeking to impede it. But notwithstanding the lack of sympathetic cooperation, I have one consolation, that I cannot get away from the race, and so long as I am in the race and since I have sense and judgment enough to know what affects the race affects me, it is my duty to help the race to clear itself of those things that affect us in common. White man's solution for the Negro problem in America. Immediately after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in America, the white man started to think how he could solve the new problem of the Negro. He saw that the Negro could not be slaughtered by wholesale killing, in that it would be a blot on American civilization. He therefore had to resort to some means of solving the problem, which meant the extinction of the Negro in America. The plan he decided on was as follows. Now that America is undeveloped, and we have but 34 million in population, a number not large enough to develop the country as we want it, we will use the 4 million blacks until we have built up the country sufficiently, and when we no longer need their labor, we will throw them off and let them starve economically and die of themselves, or emigrate elsewhere, we care not where. Then no one can accuse us of being inhuman to the Negro, as we shall not have massacred him. A hearty welcome is extended to white people from all parts of the world to come to and settle in America. They come in by the thousands every month. Why? The idea is to build up a vast white population in America so as to make the white people independent of Negro labor, thereby depriving them of the means of livelihood, the wherewithal to buy bread, which means that in a short while they will die of starvation. Those of us who study industrial conditions among the race must have noticed that Negroes in America have been thrown out of jobs that they occupied formerly, and their positions taken by European immigrants. Now, if the white people have not reached the apex of their intention industrially, as far as the development of the country is concerned, and they have exhibited such a degree of prejudice since they started their plan, how much more prejudiced will they not become in the next 100 years, when their population will be doubled by emigration and birth rate? This is the problem the Negro has to face in America, the true solution of the Negro problem, 1922. As far as Negroes are concerned, in America we have the problem of lynching, peonage, and disfranchisement. In the West Indies, South and Central America, we have the problem of peonage, serfdom, industrial and political governmental inequality. In Africa we have not only peonage and serfdom, but outright slavery, racial exploitation and alien political monopoly. We cannot allow a continuation of these crimes against our race. As 400 million men, women and children, worthy of the existence given us by the divine Creator, we are determined to solve our own problem by redeeming our motherland Africa from the hands of alien exploiters and found there a government, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of our race scattered all over the world, and to compel the respect of the nations and races of the earth. Do they lynch Englishmen, Frenchmen, Germans, or Japanese? No. And why? Because these people are represented by great governments, mighty nations and empires strongly organized. Yes, and ever ready to shed the last drop of blood and spend the last penny in the national treasury to protect the honor and integrity of a citizen outraged anywhere. Until the Negro reaches this point of national independence, all he does as a race will count for naught, because the prejudice that will stand out against him even with his ballot in his hand, with his industrial progress, to show, will be of such an overwhelming nature as to perpetuate mob violence and mob rule, from which he will suffer, and which he will not be able to stop with his industrial wealth and with his ballot. You may argue that he can use his industrial wealth and his ballot to force the government to recognize him, but he must understand that the government is the people, that the majority of the people dictate the policy of governments, and if the majority is against a measure, a thing, or a race, then the government is impotent to protect that measure, thing, or race. If the Negro were to live in this Western Hemisphere for another 500 years, he would still be outnumbered by other races who are prejudiced against him. He cannot resort to the government for protection, for government will be in the hands of the majority of the people who are prejudiced against him. Hence, for the Negro, to depend on the ballot and his industrial progress alone will be hopeless, as it does not help him when he is lynched, burned, Jim Crowed and segregated. The future of the Negro, therefore, outside of Africa spells ruin and disaster. White propaganda about Africa. This propaganda of disassociating Western Negroes from Africa is not a new one. For many years, white propagandists have been printing tons of literature to impress scattered Ethiopia, especially that portion within their civilization, with the idea that Africa is a despised place, inhabited by savages and cannibals, where no civilized human being should go, especially black civilized human beings. This propaganda is promulgated for the cause that is being realized today. That cause is colonial expansion for the white nations of the world. At the present time, the world is not producing enough food to feed all its inhabitants. The strong are fed and the weak starve. That is why there are famines in certain countries, even though those countries produce certain things for human consumption. The strong go there and take the food and send it home, just as how Great Britain and France go into Africa, take out the products and ship them away to feed Europeans and leave Africans to starve. The strong will always live at the expense of the weak. This rush for territory, this encroachment on lands, is only a desire of the strong races, especially the white race, to get hold of those portions and bits of land necessary for their economic existence, knowing well that, in another 200 years, there will not be enough supplies in the world for all of its inhabitants. The weaker peoples must die. At present, Negroes are the weakest people, and if we do not get power and strength, now we shall be doomed to extermination. The 3 stages of the Negro in contact with the white man. I believe, as far as the Negro is concerned politically, that there are 3 stages relating to our contact with the white man. The first stage in the life of the Negro in this Western Hemisphere was the stage when the white man shackled us in Africa and brought us here and kept us for 250 years. During this period we worked and received no recompense, no pay for our labor, and we were satisfied because of the white man's Christian teaching, learn to labor and to wait. The second stage was the thing called emancipation, which we have enjoyed for 58 years. This stage came when they gave us partial freedom and a petty existence by way of wages, and we were satisfied during that stage to do just what they told us to do. We worked for small wages and voted Republican, Democratic, and so forth, until after 58 years we discovered that a change was necessary. Now we have entered into the third stage of our existence, wherein we say to the white man after 250 years of slavery and 58 years of partial freedom under your leadership, we are going to try but 50 years under our own direction. This new stage calls for all the manhood within the race and means that we must throw off all the conditions that affected us in the first and second stages and go out and acquit ourselves like men in the economic, industrial, and political arena. Booker T. Washington's program. The world held up the great sage of Tuskegee, Booker T. Washington, as the only leader for the race. They looked forward to him and his teachings as the leadership for all times, not calculating that the industrially educated Negro would himself evolve a new ideal after having been trained by the sage of Tuskegee. The world satisfied itself to believe that succeeding Negro leaders would follow absolutely the teachings of Washington. Unfortunately, the world is having a rude awakening, in that we are evolving a new ideal. The new ideal includes the program of Booker T. Washington and has gone much further. Things have changed wonderfully since Washington came on the scene. His vision was industrial opportunity for the Negro, but the sage of Tuskegee has passed off the stage of life and left behind a new problem, a problem that must be solved, not by the industrial leader only, but by the political and military leaders as well. If Washington had lived, he would have had to change his program. No leader can successfully lead this race of ours without giving an interpretation of the awakened spirit of the new Negro, who does not seek industrial opportunity alone, but a political voice. The world is amazed at the desire of the new Negro, for with his strong voice he is demanding a place in the affairs of the world. Belief that the race problem will adjust itself a fallacy. Some of our leaders in the Negro race flatter themselves into believing that the problem of black and white in America will work itself out, and that all the Negro has to do is to be humble, submissive, and obedient, and everything will work out well in the sweet by and by. But the keen student will observe this, that a terrible mistake was made between 40 and 50 years ago, when black men were elected to legislative assemblies all over the country, especially in the southern states and even at the national capital, when representatives of this race occupied seats in Congress. The mistake was made as far as the white people were concerned. There was a state of disorganization in the nation, and in that state certain things happened by mere chance. In the chance, dozens of black men became senators and congressmen. This opened up to the eyes of the white nation the possibility of the black man governing the white man in these United States of America, the possibility of the black man making laws to govern the white man. This possibility drove them almost to madness in suddenly rejecting the spirit of the Constitution and the Declaration of Lincoln that all men are created equal. Hence a determination was arrived at that never again would it be possible for the race of slaves to govern the race of masters within these United States of America. Some of us believe that this slave race of ours will live in the United States of America, and in the future again become lawmakers for the white race. Nothing of the kind has happened in all human history. There is not one instance where a slave race living in the same country has ever yet ruled and governed the masters. It has never been so in history, and it will never be so in the future. The hidden spirit of America is determined that it shall never be, caring not what hopes and promises we get. But history has recorded where a race of slaves through evolution, through progress, has risen to the heights where they ruled and dominated those who once enslaved them, but that race of slaves has always had to betake itself to other habitats and there, apart from those who once enslaved them, developed a power of their own, a strength of their own, and in the higher development of that strength and of that power, they, like others, have made conquests, and the conquests sometimes have enabled them to enslave those who once enslaved them. So for us to encourage the idea that one day Negroes will rise to the highest in the administration of this white government is only encouraging a vain hope. The only wise thing for us as ambitious Negroes to do is to organize the world over and build up for the race a mighty nation of our own in Africa. And this race of ours that cannot get recognition and respect in the country where we were slaves by using our own ability, power, and genius, would develop for ourselves in another country in our habitat a nation of our own, and be able to send back from that country, from that native habitat, to the country where we were once enslaved, representatives of our race, that would get as much respect as any other ambassadors from any other race or nation. Examples of white Christian control of Africa. The world has seen many fair examples of white Christian control of Africa. The outrages of Leopold of Belgium, when he butchered thousands of our defenseless brothers and sisters in the Belgian Congo, and robbed them of their rubber. The natives of Kenya, Southeast Africa, armed with sticks and stones, rebelled against the injustices and brutality of the English, and were hewn down by machine guns, because they aid not supply the demands of the invaders. The Hottentots of Southwest Africa, in rebellion against similar brutality and exploitation, using spears and leather shields to protect themselves, were bombed from airplanes by the Christian whites. The above are but few examples of the many atrocities committed on our defenseless brothers and sisters in Africa by white exploiters and invaders. Surely the introduction of chemical gas among the natives of Africa would place them in a better position to handle the alien disturbers of African peace. It strikes me that with all the civilization this Western Hemisphere affords, Negroes ought to take better advantage of the cause of higher education. We could make of ourselves better mechanics and scientists, and in cases where we can help our brothers in Africa by making use of the knowledge we possess, it would be but our duty. If Africa is to be redeemed, the Western Negro will have to make a valuable contribution along technical and scientific lines. The thought behind their deeds, behind the murder of millions of Negroes annually in Africa, is the well-organized system of exploitation by the alien intruders who desire to rob Africa of every bit of its wealth for the satisfaction of their race and the upkeep of their bankrupt European countries. If we of the Western world take no interest in the higher development of the African natives, it will mean that in another 100 years historians and writers will tell us that the black man once inhabited Africa, just as the North American Indian once inhabited America. But those of us who lead are well versed in Western civilization, and are determined that the black man shall not be a creature of the past, but a full-fledged man of the present, and a power to be reckoned with in the future. Similarity of persecution. Christ came into the world centuries ago to redeem lost mankind. From the age of 12 to his crucifixion, he taught the doctrine of salvation without fear of the great and mighty ones of his day. But his fellow Jews became jealous of his success and sought means to get rid of him. They argued among themselves, saying, "How can we do it? We have no power, no judges, and if we lay hands upon him, he will have us apprehended by the Roman authorities. The best thing we can do is to frame him up." So they made certain statements to the Roman government, which had Jesus incarcerated, while his brother Jews shouted with joy as they had accomplished their desire. When Jesus was brought to trial, Pontius Pilate, the governor, did not care to send him to prison, as he had not interfered with the honor and reputation of any Roman citizen, and the Romans were not jealous of the work of this Jew. But the Jews who were jealous of Christ said, "This man is preaching against Caesar and the state. He is preaching the doctrine of rebellion among the peaceful Jews and citizens of the state. If you do not convict this man, you are not a friend of Caesar." Pilate, being thus forced against his will, was compelled to decide against Jesus, even though he knew that Jesus had done no wrong. After he was condemned, Pilate still hoped to get his conscience clear by letting Jesus go, in that Pilate was empowered to release one criminal on feast day. When the time came for the condemned men to be crucified, Pilate asked them to choose between Barabbas, the robber, and Jesus, whom they called the King of the Jews, and they cried, "Crucify Jesus and let Barabbas go." Pilate said, "What evil hath he done?" But they cried the more, "Crucify him." So we have a relative position at this time. Selfish, jealous Negroes know they can do nothing to impede the progress of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And if left alone, we will go on organizing Negroes throughout the world, so they say. We cannot handle Garvey and his organization, as we have no power. Let us go to the state and federal authorities and frame him up. Let us say he is an anarchist, a seditionist, and is speaking against the government. Like the Jews of old, they cry, "Crucify him," or rather, send him to prison, deport him. During Christ's sojourn on earth, he taught many lessons. Among them, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This declaration has inspired men through all ages to make their sacrifice in the cause of human liberty. When we recount the many noble deeds of the heroes and martyrs of the various nations and races of the world who have sacrificed their lives in the cause of freedom, we will readily realize that this declaration of Christ has proved itself true through the sacrifice of Jesus and the yielding up of his life on Calvary's cross. The world today has caught an inspiration that will live forever. In the time when he taught his doctrine, few men believed in and followed him, but after the lapse of centuries, we find that Christianity has become the greatest moral force in the world. And, as with Christianity, so with every great human movement taught under similar circumstances. May we not say to ourselves that the doctrine Jesus taught, that of redeeming mankind, is the doctrine we ourselves must teach in the redemption of our struggling race. Let us therefore cling fast to the great ideal we have before us. This time it is not the ideal of redeeming the world, such as was the ideal of Jesus, but it is the ideal of redeeming and saving 400 million souls who have suffered for centuries from the persecution of alien races. As Christ by his teachings, his sufferings and his death, triumphed over his foes through the resurrection, so do we hope that out of our sufferings and persecutions of today, we will triumph in the resurrection of our newborn race. Shall the Negro be exterminated? The Negro now stands at the crossroads of human destiny. He is at the place where he must either step forward or backward. If he goes backward, he dies. If he goes forward, it will be with the hope of a greater life. Those of us who have developed our minds scientifically are compelled, by duty, to step out among the millions of the unthinking masses and convince them of the seriousness of the age in which we live. From Adam and Eve, we are either on the way to a higher racial existence or racial extermination. This much is known and realized by every thoughtful race and nation, Hence, we have the death struggle of the different races of Europe and Asia in the scramble of the survival of the fittest race. As we look at things, we see that the great world in which we live has undergone much change since the time of the creation. When God created the world, and all therein, he handed his authority over to the two beings he created in his own image, namely, Adam and Eve. From the time of Adam and Eve, the human race has multiplied by leaps and bounds. Where we once had two persons to exercise authority over the world, we today have 1,500,000,000 claiming authority and possession of the same world that was once the property of the two. The tragedy of race extinction. When the colonists of America desired possession of the land, they saw that a weak Aboriginal race was in their way. What did they do? They got hold of them, killed them, and buried them underground. This is a fair indication of what will happen to the weaker peoples of the world in another 200 or 300 years, when the stronger races will have developed themselves to the position of complete mastery of all things material. They will not, then, as they have not in the past, allow a weak and defenseless race to stand in their way, especially if in their doing so they will endanger their happiness, their comfort, and their pleasures. These are the things that strike the thoughtful Negro as being dangerous, and these are the things that cause us who make up the Universal Negro Improvement Association to be fighting tenaciously for the purpose of building up a strong Negro race, so as to make it impossible for us to be exterminated in the future, to make room for the stronger races, even as the North American Indian has been exterminated to make room for the great white man on this North American continent. The illiterate and shallow-minded Negro, who can see no farther than his nose, is now the greatest stumbling block in the way of the race. He tells us that we must be satisfied with our condition, that we must not think of building up a nation of our own, that we must not seek to organize ourselves racially, but that we must depend upon the good feeling of the other fellow for the solution of the problem that now confronts us. This is a dangerous policy, and it is my duty to warn the 400 million Negroes of the world against this kind of a leadership that will try to make Negroes believe that all will be well without their taking upon themselves the task of bettering their condition politically, industrially, educationally, and otherwise. The time has come for those of us who have the vision of the future to inspire our people to a closer kinship, to a closer love of self, because it is only through this appreciation of self will we be able to rise to that higher life that will make us not an extinct race in the future, but a race of men fit to survive. The price of leadership. Those of us who are blazing the way in this new propaganda of the Universal Negro Improvement Association to enlighten our people everywhere are at times very much annoyed and discouraged by the acts of our own people, in that consciously or unconsciously they do so many things to hurt our deeper feeling of loyalty and love for the race. But what can we do? Can we forsake them because they hurt our feelings? Surely not. Painful though it may be to be interfered with and handicapped in the performance of the higher sense of duty, yet we must, martyr-like, make up our minds and our hearts to pay the price of leadership. We must be sympathetic, we must be forgiving, we must really have forbearance, so that when the ignorant and illiterate fellow who happens to be a member of your own race stands up to block the passage of some cause that you believe would be to his benefit and to yours as a people, you will be able to overlook him, even though he fosters his opposition with the greatest amount of insult to your intelligence and to your dignity. The excuse that some of our most brilliant men give for not identifying themselves with race movements is that they cannot tolerate the interference of the illiterate Negro, who, being a member of the same organization, will attempt to dictate what you should do in the interest of the race, when his act is based upon no deeper judgment than his like or dislike for the person he is opposing, or the satisfaction it would give him to embarrass the person he feels like opposing. Many an able leader is lost to his race because of this fear, and sometimes we must admit the reasonableness of this argument. But as I have said, leadership means martyrdom, leadership means sacrifice, leadership means giving up one's personality, giving up of everything for the cause that is worthwhile. It is only because of that feeling that I personally continue to lead the Universal Negro Improvement Association, because like every other leader, I have had to encounter the opposition, the jealousy, the plotting of men who take advantage of the situation, simply because they happen to be members of the organization, and that we may have to depend upon their vote, one way or the other, for the good of the cause. Not that some of us care one row of pins about what the other fellow thinks, but when it is considered that we can only achieve success through harmony and unity, then it can be realized how much one has to sacrifice as a leader for getting that harmony that is necessary to bring about the results that are desired. The white race. We desire harmony and unity today more than ever, because it is only through the bringing together of the 400 million Negroes into one mighty bond that we can successfully pilot our way through the avenues of opposition and the oceans of difficulties that seem to confront us. When it is considered that the great white race is making a Herculean struggle to become the only surviving race of the centuries, and when it is further considered that the great yellow race under the leadership of Japan is making a like struggle, then more than ever the seriousness of the situation can be realized as far as our race is concerned. If we sit supinely by and allow the great white race to lift itself in numbers and in power, it will mean that in another 500 years this full-grown race of white men will in turn exterminate the weaker race of black men, for the purpose of finding enough room on this limited mundane sphere to accommodate that race, which will have numerically multiplied itself into many billions. This is the danger point. What will become of the Negro in another 500 years if he does not organize now to develop and to protect himself? The answer is that he will be exterminated for the purpose of making room for the other races that will be strong enough to hold their own against the opposition of all and sundry. An appeal to the intelligentsia. The leadership of the Negro of today must be able to locate the race, and not only for today, but for all times. It is in the desire to locate the Negro in a position of prosperity and happiness in the future that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is making this great fight for the race's emancipation everywhere and the founding of a great African government. Every sober-minded Negro will see immediately the reason why we should support a movement of this kind. If we will survive, then it must be done through our own effort, through our own energy. No race of weaklings can survive in the days of tomorrow, because they will be hard and strenuous days fraught with many difficulties. I appeal to the higher intelligence as well as to the illiterate groups of our race. We must work together. Those of us who fire better positioned intellectually must exercise forbearance with the illiterate and help them to see the right. If we happen to be members of the same organization and the illiterate man tries to embarrass you, do not become disgusted, but remember that he does it because he does, not know better. And it is your duty to forbear and forgive, because the ends that we serve are not of self, but for the higher development of the entire race. It is on this score, it is on this belief, that I make the sacrifice of self to help this downtrodden race of mine. Nevertheless, I say there is a limit to human patience, and we should not continue to provoke the other fellow against his human feelings, for in doing so we may be but bringing down upon our own heads the pillars of the temple. Africa for the Africans. For 5 years, the Universal Negro Improvement Association has been advocating the cause of Africa for the Africans. That is, that the Negro peoples of the world should concentrate upon the object of building up for themselves a great nation in Africa. When we started our propaganda toward this end, several of the so-called intellectual Negroes who have been bamboozling the race for over half a century said that we were crazy, that the Negro peoples of the Western world were not interested in Africa and could not live in Africa. One editor and leader went so far as to say at his so-called Pan-African Congress that American Negroes could not live in Africa because the climate was too hot. All kinds of arguments have been adduced by these Negro intellectuals against the colonization of Africa by the black race. Some said that the black man would ultimately work out his existence alongside of the white man in countries founded and established by the latter. Therefore, it was not necessary for Negroes to seek an independent nationality of their own. The old-time stories of African fever, African bad climate, African mosquitoes, African savages, have been repeated by these brainless intellectuals of ours as a scare against our people in America and the West Indies, taking a kindly interest in the new program of building a racial empire of our own in our motherland. Now that years have rolled by and the Universal Negro Improvement Association has made the circuit of the world with its propaganda, we find eminent statesmen and leaders of the white race coming out boldly advocating the cause of colonizing Africa. with the Negroes of the Western world. A year ago, Senator McCollum of the Mississippi legislature introduced a resolution in the House for the purpose of petitioning the Congress of the United States of America and the President to use their good influence in securing from the Allies sufficient territory in Africa in liquidation of the war debt, which territory should be used for the establishing of an independent nation for American Negroes. About the same time, Senator France of Maryland gave expression to a similar desire in the Senate of the United States during a speech on the soldiers' bonus. He said, "We owe a big debt to Africa, and one which we have too long ignored. I need not enlarge upon our peculiar interest in the obligation to the people of Africa. Thousands of Americans have for years been contributing to the missionary work which has been carried out by the noble men and women who have been sent out in that field by the churches of America. Germany to the front. This reveals a real change on the part of prominent statesmen in their attitude on the African question." Then came another suggestion from Germany, for which Dr. Heinrich Schnee, a former governor of German East Africa, is author. This German statesman suggests in an interview given out in Berlin and published in New York that America takes over the mandatories of Great Britain and France in Africa for the colonization of American Negroes. Speaking on the matter, he says as regards the attempt to colonize Africa with the surplus American colored population, this would in a long way settle the vexed problem, and under the plans such as Senator France has outlined, might enable France and Great Britain to discharge their duties to the United States and simultaneously ease the burden of German reparations which is paralyzing economic life. With expressions as above quoted from prominent world statesmen and from the demands made by such men as Senators France and McCollum, it is clear that the question of African nationality is not a far-fetched one, but is as reasonable and feasible as was the idea of an American nationality. A program at last. I trust that the Negro peoples of the world are now convinced that the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association is not a visionary one, but very practical, and that it is not so far-fetched, but can be realized in a short while if the entire race will only cooperate and work toward the desired end. Now that the work of our organization has started to bear fruit, we find that some of these doubting Thomases of 3 and 4 years ago are endeavoring to mix themselves up with the popular idea. Of rehabilitating Africa in the interest of the Negro, they are now advancing spurious programs, and in a short while will endeavor to force themselves upon the public as advocates and leaders of the African idea. It is felt that those who have followed the career of the Universal Negro Improvement Association will not allow themselves to be deceived by these Negro opportunists who have always sought to live off the ideas of other people. The dream of a Negro empire. It is only a question of a few more years when Africa will be completely colonized by Negroes, as Europe is by the white race. What we want is an independent African nationality, and if America is to help the Negro peoples of the world establish such a nationality, then we welcome the assistance. It is hoped that when the time comes for American and West Indian Negroes to settle in Africa, they will realize their responsibility and their duty. It will not be to go to Africa for the purpose of exercising an overlordship over the natives, but it shall be the purpose of the Universal Negro Improvement Association to have established in Africa that brotherly cooperation, which will make the interests of the African native and the American and West Indian Negro one and the same, that is to say, we shall enter into a common partnership to build up Africa in the interests of our race. Oneness of interests. Everybody knows that there is absolutely no difference between the native African and the American and West Indian Negroes in that we are descendants from one common family stock. It is only a matter of accident that we have been divided and kept apart for over 300 years, but it is felt that when the time has come for us to get back together, we shall do so in the spirit of brotherly love, and any Negro who expects that he will be assisted here, there or anywhere by the Universal Negro Improvement Association to exercise a haughty superiority over the fellows of his own race makes a tremendous mistake. Such men had better remain where they are and not attempt to become in any way interested in the higher development of Africa. The Negro has had enough of the vaunted practice of race superiority as inflicted upon him by others. Therefore, he is not prepared to tolerate a similar assumption on the part of his own people. In America and the West Indies, We have Negroes who believe themselves so much above their fellows as to cause them to think that any readjustment in the affairs of the race should be placed in their hands for them to exercise a kind of an autocratic and despotic control, as others have done to us for centuries. Again, I say, it would be advisable for such Negroes to take their hands and minds off the now popular idea of colonizing Africa in the interest of the Negro race, because their being identified with this new program will not in any way help us because of the existing feeling among Negroes everywhere not to tolerate the infliction of race or class superiority upon them, as is the desire of the self-appointed and self-created race leadership that we have been having for the last 50 years. The basis of an African aristocracy. The masses of Negroes in America, the West Indies, South and Central America are in sympathetic accord with the aspirations of the native Africans. We desire to help them build up Africa as a Negro empire, where every black man, whether he was born in Africa or in the Western world, will have the opportunity to develop on his own lines, under the protection of the most favorable democratic institutions. It will be useless, as before stated, for bombastic Negroes to leave America and the West Indies to go to Africa, thinking that they will have privileged positions to inflict upon the race that bastard aristocracy that they have tried to maintain in this Western world at the expense of the masses. Africa shall develop an aristocracy of its own, but it shall be based upon service and loyalty to race. Let all Negroes work toward that end. I feel that it's only a question of a few more years before our program will be accepted not only by the few statesmen of America who are now interested in it, but by the strong statesmen of the world, as the only solution to the great race problem. There is no other way to avoid the threatening war of the races that is bound to engulf all mankind, which has been prophesied by the world's greatest thinkers. There is no better method than by apportioning every race to its own habitat. The time has really come for the Asiatic to govern themselves in Asia, as the Europeans are in Europe and the Western world, so also is it wise for the Africans to govern themselves at home, and thereby bring peace and satisfaction to the entire human family. The future, as I see it, it comes to the individual, the race, the nation, once in a lifetime to decide upon the course to be pursued as a career. The hour has now struck for the individual Negro, as well as the entire race, to decide the course that will be pursued in the interest of our own liberty. We who make up the Universal Negro Improvement Association have decided that we shall go forward, upward and onward toward the great goal of human liberty. We have determined among ourselves that all barriers placed in the way of our progress must be removed, must be cleared away, for we desire to see the light of a brighter day. The Negro is ready. The Universal Negro Improvement Association for 5 years has been proclaiming to the world the readiness of the Negro to carve out a pathway for himself in the course of life. Men of other races and nations have become alarmed at this attitude of the Negro in his desire to do things for himself and by himself. This alarm has become so universal that organizations have been brought into being here, there and everywhere for the purpose of deterring and obstructing this forward move of our race. Propaganda has been waged here, there and everywhere for the purpose of misinterpreting the intention of this organization. Some have said that this organization seeks to create discord and discontent among the races. Some say we are organized for the purpose of hating other people. Every sensible, sane and honest-minded person knows that the Universal Negro Improvement Association has no such intention. We are organized for the absolute purpose of bettering our condition, industrially, commercially, socially, religiously and politically. We are organized not to hate other men, but to lift ourselves and to demand respect of all humanity. We have a program that we believe to be righteous, we believe it to be just, and we have made up our minds to lay down ourselves on the altar of sacrifice for the realization of this great hope of ours, based upon the foundation of righteousness. We declare to the world that Africa must be free, that the entire Negro race must be emancipated from industrial bondage, peonage and serfdom. We make no compromise, we make no apology in this our declaration. We do not desire to create offense on the part of other races, but we are determined that we shall be heard, that we shall be given the rights to which we are entitled. The propaganda of our enemies, for the purpose of creating doubts about the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, many attempts have been made to cast shadow and gloom over our work. They have even written the most uncharitable things about our organization. They have spoken so unkindly of our effort, but what do we care? They spoke unkindly and uncharitably about all the reform movements that have helped in the betterment of humanity. They maligned the great movement of the Christian religion. They maligned the great liberation movements of America, of France, of England, of Russia, can we expect? Then, to escape being maligned in this, our desire for the liberation of Africa and the freedom of 400 million Negroes of the world, we have unscrupulous men and organizations working in opposition to us. Some trying to capitalize the new spirit that has come to the Negro to make profit out of it, to their own selfish benefit. Some are trying to set back the Negro from seeing the hope of his own liberty, and thereby poisoning our people's mind against the motives of our organization. But every sensible, far-seeing Negro in this enlightened age knows what propaganda means.